นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Something that people regularly ask for advice about in the monastery is how to deal with the fast changing pace of life. Technology, society, even climate. With climate change, there's often changes and new things we have to experience that maybe we're not used to. Even here, we just had a hot spell or a heat wave in the middle of winter. We're still in winter in Melbourne. We've had summer temperatures and now we're paying for it. We've got a thunderstorm going on outside. But actually change is nothing new. And you're probably aware the Buddha's first teaching, or first formal teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, ended with one of his students, Venerable Kondanya. They say opening the Dhamma eye, gaining insight into the transient nature or the changing nature of phenomena, physical phenomena, the body, the material world, and mental phenomena, the mind, mental activity, thoughts, feelings, memories. He had a clear insight which helped him to separate between, you might say, the thinking mind, which likes to create and label and form views and opinions about everything and react to everything with liking and disliking, and the material world, which is just as it is, made up of different material elements which are not a person or a being, but just earth, air, fire and water. By seeing change, he could also see through the way human beings, we make this delusion or create this delusion of a solid self, and from there we start to feel like we control everything and own everything, and lots of suffering and stress ensues because of it. So he had a very clear insight that changed his whole way of looking at life, looking at himself, looking at the world around him. You might even say it was a kind of earth-shaking insight. And he became what we call a stream enterer or stream winner, sotapanna, meaning that insight never left him afterwards. It only deepened as he continued his practice, and eventually he became fully enlightened or reached nibbana. So that insight stayed with him as a constant in a world that is not constant, or a world that is always changing. And that's because his mind became kind of very close to the Dhamma, to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. You probably heard this famous phrase, one who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha, one who knows the Dhamma knows the Buddha, one who knows the Buddha knows the Dhamma. Dhamma means truth, the way things are. So the Buddha and the Dhamma are, in essence, the same thing. What does the Buddha realize? What does the Buddha become enlightened by? Well, it's the Dhamma, the truth, by having penetrating insight into the truth. And his central teachings we call the Four Noble Truths, the Arya Satya Dhamma, explain about suffering and how to end suffering. But the Dhamma is the constant. It's just the way things are. And the Buddha's enlightenment was because of the Dhamma. He had penetrating insight into the truth of the way things are. And it's why the Dhamma is peaceful. It's because it's constant. It's just the way things are. And the reason we suffer and feel stressed and have problems in life is because we're not seeing or knowing the way things are. And we start creating fantasies and illusions and hiding from the truth, denying the truth, trying to cover over the truth. Sometimes we do it deliberately, sometimes we do it just habitually without realizing. But that's the nature of the cause of our suffering, is ignorance or just delusion and not understanding the way things are. We suffer because of it. But what makes the Buddha so special is he saw through that, or saw what is the cause of suffering for a human being, and went beyond it. And that's why we perhaps give so much value to the Buddha and his teachings. When I was a young monk, I went to Thailand to live with Ajahn Chah, and I stayed at Wat Nanachat, the international forest monastery, which is about 8 kilometers from Ajahn Chah's monastery. And in those days there was no cars available, no electricity. It was very simple, the forest and the life of a monk in the monastery. So if we wanted to see Ajahn Chah, we had to walk to see him. And we walked for a couple of hours to get to Wat Pong, the monastery where he lived. And myself, and I think most of the other monks, or all the other monks, were happy to do that from time to time, because we believed Ajahn Chah was an enlightened disciple of the Buddha. We wanted to know and hear Dhamma from Ajahn Chah, or at least meet him, be in his presence. And we gave value to what we call enlightenment, or this knowledge that those who have practiced the Dhamma of the Buddha or realized the Dhamma of the Buddha have. It's been like that since the time of the Buddha. In the time of the Buddha, clearly there was not much technological development in northern India, certainly no cars or electricity or anything. But people would walk sometimes for days to get to see the Buddha, because the idea of somebody who has understood the truth and freed their mind from suffering was a huge thing, maybe the biggest thing in the world, in people's lives at that time. Of course, if they've never met the Buddha or heard the Dhamma yet, it's just an idea, the idea that there are such people who are free from suffering and really know the way out of suffering, beyond suffering. It was something that people gave a great value to, importance to, so they were willing to walk and maybe even risk dangers, because in those days, walking would mean walking through the jungle. There'd be wild animals, bandits, disease, maybe food and drink could be scarce, all kinds of obstacles, but they were willing to do that just to meet a Buddha. For some people, just hearing the word that there is an enlightened Buddha who has realized this Dhamma, who has realized this teaching, just that thought brought them great joy. They'd hear, oh, there is an enlightened Buddha, where is he? And it might be close by, because in those days there's no internet, so they probably didn't get a lot of news about India and what was going on in other towns and areas, but maybe through people travelling who'd already met the Buddha, they pass through your village and they say, oh, we met the Buddha, there's a Buddha, he's not that far away, he's here, he's there. And people would have joy arise in their hearts, just knowing, there is someone who is enlightened, a fully awakened Buddha who knows the way out of suffering. So since the time of the Buddha, just the idea, the concept of enlightenment or awakening has aroused joy, happiness in people's hearts. And in our day and age, well, we don't have the Buddha, the living Buddha, but we still have the Dhamma, his teachings, and we have the Sangha. And enlightened teachers such as Ajahn Chah and others arouse often the same kind of joy. And of course, joy, happiness, when it arises in your heart, is a very energizing factor. And what you might call the joy of Dhamma is much better than just your more mundane, average kind of joy of eating nice food, meeting friends, enjoying a movie, whatever, what we call sensual pleasure. That kind of joy is real, true, but it doesn't last very long, and it doesn't lead you to do that much, maybe, especially nowadays, because we have so much access to different kinds of pleasures. But the kind of joy of Dhamma, knowing that there are wise, peaceful teachers and people who can maybe show you the way out of suffering, does lead on to a lot of effort and energy. It makes people willing to walk for days on end or hours on end or go through obstacles to get there. Even nowadays, I think many of you listening, you may have been on journeys to meet with Dhamma teachers, to hear the Dhamma, to make offerings, to be in the presence of Dhamma teachers, maybe in other countries or many hours from where you live. So it has a very energizing effect on the mind, and that leads on to action, what you call skillful action. It's one of the effects of the Dhamma. Of course, when you meet the teacher, just as in the time of the Buddha, people would go and they would meet the Buddha and maybe sit there and just bask in his presence or make an offering if it was the right time to make an offering. I imagine in those days they didn't have a lot of wealth, most people. Sure, the millionaires had some material wealth, but the average person maybe could only offer a flower, a candle, something very small, or some rice on alms round or something. But they would make their offering again as an expression of their joy, their faith in the Buddha. And if they could, they would do that with a belief, this is something really good, this is something valuable, important. I had that feeling to some extent, maybe it's not the Buddha, but going to see Ajahn Chah, just to sit in his presence when I first went to Thailand. Brought up this great sense of peace, joy and confidence that, enlightenment is still possible in this day and age. And if there was any way you can give some small act of service to Ajahn Chah, like when I first met Ajahn Chah, he was already ill. But sometimes there would be a chance you could go and visit him and you could empty a trash can or pick up something or give something to a monk looking after Ajahn Chah. Or in those days we used to have little fans and we'd use the fan to swipe away mosquitoes, not to kill them, but just to create air around Ajahn Chah so that a mosquito wouldn't land on him. Of course, later on I actually went and helped nurse him, sometimes 24 hours a day, just live with him, doing everything I could for him. But even just visiting Sangha and laity would do whatever smaller or greater act they could to express their joy and happiness at meeting the great teacher. And that's something very rare in the world. You can't get that so much online or second-hand. Online tends to be second-hand. I know it's often still useful, like now, to listen to Dhamma and discuss Dhamma, but there's also something you get in person when you meet teachers, very similar to the time of the Buddha, I think. You get a sense of this is some living example of the goodness that humans can aspire to and attain. It's not just a fantasy or a vague hope, but actual reality of attaining purity of mind, you might say, a mind free from suffering, stress, and the causes, greed, anger, and delusion. Its sense of it's possible. Again, you might say that's an even greater form of, has a greater energizing effect on the mind. One thing, just hearing there might be an enlightened teacher, or the Buddha in the time of the Buddha, or Sangha in later years. Just hearing of the presence of Sangha is one thing, but actually meeting them and being in their presence, even more, it catalyzes many, many good qualities for the practitioner, the interested or the curious practitioner. And this is even something you can sense or experience beyond words as well. Like, of course, the Dhamma we mainly know through talks and books, and we hear the Dhamma and read the Dhamma. And that is important, and you might say vital, but it's also something you feel, isn't it? So like for me, when I first went to Thailand, I couldn't speak Thai, and Ajahn Chah wasn't talking either. So my first impression of Ajahn Chah was by feeling, and he was old and sick, so he didn't look that great because he wasn't in the best of physical health, but the presence of mind and the feeling was something very tangible. And not just me, but pretty much everyone around him agreed, and that includes people who were not necessarily Buddhist or didn't know Ajahn Chah. So that includes people like my friends and family who came to visit me would meet Ajahn Chah and also feel it, and could just sit in his presence and immediately feel some kind of calm and peace that they didn't normally feel. And on you can go, the number of stories and occasions when people just came into his presence crying maybe because they're so stressed and so unhappy, and their tears sort of gradually faded. People who were very angry calmed down, people who were very sad kind of perked up a bit. All kinds of amazing experiences, even wild animals from the forest coming to just be next to Ajahn Chah and being calmed by his presence. That's again another attractive quality of the Dhamma that brings us in and energizes the mind to look for goodness and want that which is better than what we've experienced so far in life, you might say. Gives value to the Dhamma and the way of practice. Of course, then that leads on to actually wanting to hear the Dhamma or read the Dhamma to get the actual instructions and details. And that's why even online, when you're more removed from teachers perhaps, when you have Dhamma online, it's still valuable because we need to share experience, answer questions, elaborate on the way of practice and give advice how to deal with obstacles and whatever. But the aim is always to come back to the truth of the way things are, the Dhamma, the way things are. So the best teachings tend to direct you back to yourself rather than being an end in themselves. The Dhamma talk is good, but it's not so much an end in itself. It's really pointing you to practice for yourself or know for yourself. That's the aim of it. And sometimes it depends on where people are at. Sometimes, say for Ajahn Chah, sometimes when he was teaching, he could be very direct. Occasionally he could scold someone or criticize them. Sometimes he could be very smoothing. Sometimes he could use humor to relax people. Sometimes he could just explain things, but very clearly in easy to understand language. As probably you all know, you read his books now or you hear his translated talks. He's often speaking in very down-to-earth practical terms, but in a way that helps you to understand something that maybe you didn't understand before, or help deepen your understanding of something you partially understand. He was very good at that. So he had a whole range of ways of teaching, and perhaps that's again the value of the awakened mind, is it's adaptable in the way compassion and wisdom is displayed, that can fit to different situations, different people. One thing Ajahn Chah used to say is that we suffer because we've abandoned or given up the Buddha. We've let go of the Buddha. And you could say at the same time, we've let go of the Dhamma. If we're ever stressed, we're ever suffering, the mind is no longer thinking of the Buddha, no longer remembering the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. Therefore we suffer. Because as soon as you bring your mind back to the Buddha and the Dhamma, you start to feel better. I'd say that's just a fact of life. You don't have to be a Buddhist, you don't have to have any particular belief system or whatever, because the Dhamma is really just truth of the way things are. But whenever you come back to the Buddha and the Dhamma, your life starts to improve straight away, because in that moment you feel better and you have a better understanding. And Ajahn Chah is famous for this, for getting people back to the Buddha and the Dhamma, or seeing through where they are suffering and getting them to see in terms of Dhamma, whatever their particular problem was. So when Ajahn Chah began his monastery, it was back in the 1950s, he had to deal with a lot of people who were not particularly Buddhist. I guess that hasn't changed today. There's still a lot of people coming to monasteries and temples who are not particularly Buddhist. When I say not particularly Buddhist, it means they have lots of different opinions and views and beliefs which are not necessarily in line with Dhamma. And that was no different from Ajahn Chah. Some people have this sort of misty-eyed view, Ajahn Chah living in Thailand, Buddhist country, it's probably all easy for him. He got enlightened because everyone was Buddhist and all the conditions were supportive. But I'm not sure that was really true. Most of the villagers had a lot of superstition, beliefs that, say, if you're in Singapore or any kind of modern urban environment, you probably would find quite strange or unusual, or at least distant from what you believe in. There's a lot of superstition, animist beliefs in ghosts and spirits, and a lot of what you would just call wrong view around. And that was often expressed in the behaviour. There was a lot of unruly, what nowadays we'd call criminal behaviour in the local neighbourhood, in the local area. And Ajahn Chah is famous for, you might say, taming people with very wrong views and hard views and destructive views, taming them, calming them down and getting them to see the way of practice of the Dhamma. And a lot of people were very grateful for that at that time, and probably most of his original students are dead now, but he's well known for that, for helping guiding people to see the Dhamma in their daily life and to change their views for the better. And no different from the Buddha teaching Kalyano, and with his first teaching, except for Kalyano, you might say, was ripe to really see the deepest, most profound Dhamma. Ajahn Chah no doubt taught a few people to see the deepest and most profound Dhamma as well, but the majority were ordinary villagers in northeast Thailand. And some of them could be pretty rough and ready, and someone was telling me the other day about one man, what's his name? Po Nu Pi, which means Mr. Ghost of a Rat. I don't know if that's really how his name translates, but my translation of his name was, he's a villager, a famous villager, Mr. Ghost of a Rat, which is not a very nice name in the first place, I guess, who is considered to be hardcore, kind of what we'd call gangster nowadays. A rough and ready guy. We had a lot of rough views, wrong views, and was feared and not liked by many people because he did a lot of not very good things in his life. But he came across Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah had a great presence, maybe an ability to calm down even the toughest gangster, the most kind of aggressive, unruly, distrustful kind of person. He had a good way with them to talk to them and calm them down. And he was willing, because of his peace and compassion, to teach people, to listen and try and improve their views and understanding. This man was totally against Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings. When he first met Ajahn Chah, he said, I don't believe in karma, I don't believe there is such a thing as good and evil. You just do what you want and I don't care. And he was very rude, disrespectful, aggressive in the way he approached Ajahn Chah. But Ajahn Chah, being an awakened teacher, kind, peaceful, unattached, didn't bother about the bad behaviour of this man who came to see him. I guess he thought perhaps, well, the man's already here, he's come this far, perhaps he still has something good in him, there's some potential there. So Ajahn Chah proceeded to teach him on a number of occasions and question the man's views. And when the man said, I don't believe in karma, I don't believe your actions really matter, you can do what you want and nothing matters, you can do evil, there's no such thing as evil, so it doesn't really matter if you hurt other people, you steal, you kill, doesn't matter. And Ajahn Chah's sort of angle was, well, it does matter. Things come back on you, especially if you do heavy karma like killing and stealing. You very quickly you will be in trouble. If not with the authorities, you'll be unhappy in yourself. And really, you'll be both. You're going to have trouble with other people, you're going to have trouble within yourself. And at first the guy didn't believe that. He said, I don't believe you. I don't think it matters. I don't think... He said, if it's true, then when I die, I'm going to become a horrible monster in some kind of ghost realm and demon realm. So if it's true, I'm going to come back and I'm going to haunt you. I'm going to try and kill you from my next life. I'm going to try and destroy you. That's how the guy answered Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah wasn't fazed or put off. He just kept saying, no, you should really look more carefully, get to know your own mind. When you have an angry thought or greedy thought that makes you want to steal, because this guy was a bit of a thief, look at what it does to your mind. Does it make you feel peaceful? Does it help you in your life? Are the consequences good for you in body and mind? How does it affect you? And he kept pushing this line until eventually the man started to change his behaviour. Of course, when someone changes their wrong views from hating the world and taking their anger and stress out on other people and themselves, maybe drinking, doing acts of self-harm or harm to others, when they start to think about what they're doing more deeply, maybe under the influence of a good teacher like Ajahn Chah, then their behaviour starts to improve. And all the villagers in the area knew this guy as a real troublemaker, and they all noticed how, when he talked to Ajahn Chah, and after that, he started to change. He's just one example I'm giving, because he's sort of memorable, but this actually is a story that's repeated on many occasions. And some of the local villages to where Ajahn Chah lived were originally places that were very unruly, unsafe, some wild behaviour, but over the years, the decades of hearing teachings from Ajahn Chah, seeing the monks, having the opportunity to make merit, offer alms, listen to the Dhamma, think more about the Dhamma, then people changed and whole villages start to improve. And that's not a small thing, because it's in an era when there wasn't so much local government, police and that weren't around. So for villages that were very unruly, aggressive to change, people got to hear about that and they could direct it back to Ajahn Chah. So there's many stories like that of the way the Dhamma can change someone's views. And probably you have your own stories, your own life of how hearing the Dhamma in one way or another, studying it, reading it, starts to give you a new outlook, new attitude on life, for the better, I hope. And it gives you something reliable. So maybe a word I've found applies to the Dhamma. In a world of change and uncertainty, the Dhamma is reliable. It doesn't let you down, does it? Because it's the truth. What lets us down is our own views and opinions that we get caught up into, our own sense of self, our own preferences, our own desires that often lead us into trouble or get us disappointed, unhappy, or lead us into conflict with others, or whatever. The Dhamma doesn't do that. The Dhamma is very reliable. The Buddha is very reliable, which is why we call them refuges. So I always found Luang Por Chah and his teachings and the effect he had on Sangha and laity, very reminiscent of what I understood the Buddha to be. Ajahn Chah was a very good example of a disciple or a student of the Buddha in this day and age. And he really changed people for the better, really had a good effect on them. And of course, over time, as you know, people like myself and many others from overseas got to hear of Ajahn Chah and went to live and study with him and practice with him too, without being forced to do that. Somebody said today, my recollections of living in northeast Thailand 40 years ago when I first went sound like living in a prison camp. I guess externally the conditions sometimes could be pretty simple and tough. Not so much food sometimes, although normally it wasn't a problem. No electricity in the beginning, no running water, quite a lot of disease, or at least disease around, and not many comforts. So, a little bit like people's ideas of a prison camp. But of course, it wasn't like a prison camp because you're there out of faith, out of joy. So I was actually very happy to be there in the forest, practicing with Ajahn Chah, even though the conditions could be tough sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. That didn't matter because I had joy. And that's the important thing about Buddha Dhamma, is that it brings you joy when you come back to the Dhamma and the Buddha. And when you lose the Buddha Dhamma, or as Ajahn Chah would say, when you abandon the Buddha, that joy goes as well. And you might not realize it, because the reason we abandon the Buddha is because we forget and we get deluded. But when you come back to the Buddha, it's like, there's that joy. It's like when people do come and they say, I've been practicing meditation, my meditation is getting nowhere, my practice is not improving, I'm giving up on the Dhamma and going back to more worldly pursuits. I always say, try and remember whatever that it was that inspired you in the beginning. The Buddha's teachings, meeting wise, compassionate teachers maybe, and whatever joy you had, try to go back to that as a starting point. We often have to do that. We have to go back. That's why we call it a refuge. A refuge is like your safe home, your safe place. And you have to go back to your refuge over and over again. It's not something you just say, I've got a refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, but then forget all about it. That's not really using a refuge, is it? You have to go back to your refuge, maybe even every day, or even every moment of every day if you're really practicing. Ajahn Chah used to say, is your mind with Buddho, this quality of knowing? You may use the breath as your meditation object, or other techniques of vipassana, or there's many meditation techniques, but what he means is, are you with the quality of knowing, which is what we're aiming for, knowing yourself from moment to moment. That's the Buddha, the Dhamma, that's the refuge. Are you with Buddho or not? Or if you have been lost in the world for a while, something traumatic or has happened in your life, or you've maybe just been enjoying yourself so much you forget all about Buddhism, perhaps, and you're trying to get back to Buddhism and the Buddha, the Dhamma, that's the teaching. Are you with Buddho or not? When you're with Buddho, your mind tends to be at ease, feels better. You may still have problems in your life, but when you approach it from a place of Buddho with the knowing, then you're coming from a place of truth, calm, stillness. And the more you're with the mind of Buddho, the mind of the knowing, or this mind of stillness, the better placed you are to meet with the various problems, or to separate yourself off from the distractions too. A lot of our problems nowadays are coming from we have so much. As I said, when I began practicing in Thailand, we didn't have a lot in terms of material comfort, but now we do. Even in monasteries, you have plenty of food, and nowadays we have internet, and we have all kinds of material wealth, even in monasteries, and in the lay life even more so. You're earning money and buying things all the time. So one of the problems there is we're distracted easily. We're not with the knowing or the mind of Buddha. We're with our phone or our computer, or we're going here, going there, and we're always thinking about buying things, and we're always thinking about our jobs and what tasks we have to do and how we have to get ahead in our job and make more money and get on. Because there's so much we can do in this world, and we can all travel now, and we can buy things, and there's always something to be doing to distract yourself from the present moment and from this body and this mind. Maybe that's the modern challenge or obstacle we face, more than in the old days, the time of the Buddha, where maybe the problem was just making ends meet and making sure you had enough food. Nowadays it's what to do with so much distraction, so much around, that from day to day, you can be with Buddha for a minute, if that, the mind of Buddha, and you can be with all this distraction, whether it's work, entertainment, social things, 99.99% of the time. I think Ajahn Chah might say something like, we're eating up our old merit most of the time. Meaning, all of this comfort and convenience and distraction has come about through causes as well. We're comfortable because we've made merit, we've made good karma that we have enough to eat, and we have money to buy things and have all this technology and all these good things around us to distract us. That's partly it's the result of good karma, or we say merit. But are we making more merit, is the question. Are we making more good karma? Are we continuing our practice? Because merit runs out, doesn't it? Good karma and its results, its fruits, runs out. Good opportunities disappear. How is our life progressing? Our good health, how long will that last? Health is also seen in terms of merit. While you have good health, you can practice the Dhamma, you can do good, you can further your practice, you have merit. When you get very old or very sick or weak, your merit is running out. When you die, it's gone. So while you have merit, are you making more merit, or are you just using up what you have already? As we use technology, and we all know you can listen to this talk, you're hearing this talk now, good, that's a great thing. And it's your merit that you have the means to hear the Dhamma, even online like this. But in the course of a day, probably the majority of the time you're not listening to the Dhamma, you're not using the technology for such useful, beneficial things, I would imagine. Partly we use it for work, of course, have to earn a living, and that is useful, but a lot of the time it's just for more trivial things, distraction, triviality, and so on. If we're honest, that tends to be the norm now. That's the danger. And now, rather than having to struggle with the difficult, harsh conditions, we're having to deal or navigate our way through conditions that encourage indulgence and distraction. How to keep focused on the mind of Buddha when you can spend all your day scrolling on your phone, or all evening, or all morning. Some people, they wake up, first thing they do is just lie there scrolling. Or even in the old days, like when I was a kid, when you woke up, you might go and turn on the TV if it was a day that you didn't have to do anything else, like a weekend. Even that takes an effort. You have to get up and go and turn on the TV. I guess if you got a remote, you could turn it on from the remote. Nowadays, you don't even have to get out of bed, do you? You got a phone, you just lie there, scroll. maybe for half an hour or an hour before you even get out of bed. You could be scrolling the Dhamma, I guess, but there's accompanying dangers. You could be doing damage to your back, or various posture problems arise from endlessly lying in bed scrolling. And of course, what's it doing to your mind? You're not with the mind of Buddha, you're just with whatever you're scrolling, and a lot of it is not very wholesome, is it? News is often very disturbing and frightening, disappointing, worrying. There's a lot of sensuality. Even the most ordinary advert can be very sensual. A lot of entertainment, of course, and again, just distraction. That's probably more of a challenge now than just the basics of getting food and getting the simple comforts of life, isn't it? We have everything, and so the mind is going to sleep all the time, using up old merit, but not necessarily developing new merit. So this is why teachers like Ajahn Chah and why the Dhamma is still so relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago. We still have this wandering mind that needs to be trained. We still need to learn the Dhamma and bring it into our life. We still need to find some inner peace and joy to deal with the challenges, the stresses, because we're bombarded by so much material comfort, information, and with information, material comfort comes what we call sense impressions through our eyes and our ears particularly, and somewhat to some extent, nose, mouth, taste, touch, but particularly through eyes and ears, we're bombarded by sense impressions now, and you can spend your whole time just with that, whether it's through work or social life, entertainment, or just mindless distraction. That's the reality, I think, for most people, and this is far away from the mind of Buddha. We really need to get some discipline and come back to the Dhamma, the basic Dhamma practices, say, of regular meditation to bring up the mind of Buddha, to be with the breath, to be with the recitation of Buddha, to bring the mindfulness up, to set aside time for that, to be able to put the phone down, turn the computer off, to set aside some of these more worldly pursuits, because time is running out. We all get older every day, and one day we won't have the chance to hear the Dhamma, meditate, practice the Dhamma. One day we'll be lying in bed and say, I should do some more meditation, I should be more mindful, but we won't even be able to get out of bed. And that's how it is. When you get old, you get so weak, so sick, maybe you can't get out of your seat or get out of your bed. While you haven't reached that point, I would suggest use your time to practice the Dhamma. Because there's so much we have to investigate, really investigate. Why do I get stressed? Why do I get angry? Why do I get worried? Why do I fear things? Why do I follow the endless distractions and the temptations of the world? All of this is, the Buddha has already given us the answers to all these questions. His answer will be, through lack of knowing, the lack of Buddha, the lack of mindfulness and awareness, we keep following craving. Craving is desire to get and desire to get rid of. These unmindful, unaware reactions we have to everything, to all these sense impressions. As long as we don't practice, we don't really see what's going on. We don't really know what's going on. So the mind keeps racing, following craving. And it's not peaceful, is it? Craving leads to movement, leads to the mind endlessly thinking, creating, following different trains of thought, getting caught into different moods. And it's not peaceful. Whereas the mind of Buddha, the mind of the knowing, this quality of knowing, is the opposite. You're learning to set aside craving, come back to the knowing, coming back to the stillness. Even if craving arises, simply not picking it up, not following it, setting it aside and staying with the stillness more. changes your whole outlook on life, changes the way your mind works. You become more aware of the stillness of the mind rather than following the objects of craving and the movements of mind that come from craving. There's a total difference there. But we have to give ourselves a chance. If you don't practice, you don't do some meditation, you don't learn how to meditate and then put it into practice on a daily basis, so you're never really going to know this. And you might just be stuck with your beliefs, like Mr. Ghost of a Rat. Just think, oh, karma, no, it's not true. Merit, no, not true. Good and evil, no, not true. Never think about keeping precepts, practicing mindfulness, never think about respecting the Dhamma. That's how we stay on that level as long as we haven't actually put our effort into becoming more mindful and sampling or tasting the mind of Dhamma, where we have mindfulness and where the mind is still. We're never going to know. We won't be curious and we won't even try, perhaps. That's why it's, what is the most useful thing somebody can do for you is help you to get you to see your own mind. And again, Ajahn Chah was really good at that. Really good at getting people to turn around and see their own mind, often by doing very little, simply putting them in a situation where they had to see their own mind, where they had to wait. A classic one is getting people to wait. They want to talk, but he's not talking to them. He's being silent when somebody wants to engage in conversation. So they have to wait and watch the desire to speak. And if you watch that desire to speak in a situation, your mindfulness comes up, you realize, maybe you need to say something, but maybe you don't. And you just see the desire in that moment, however you're feeling, whatever's stimulating the desire to speak. Or the desire to do something. Sometimes people wanted to meditate, but he would get them doing something else, chanting or doing some job, some work. Or some people like to work. They didn't like to meditate, so he'd make them meditate. Ajahn Chah was very good at getting people to do the very opposite of what their craving was telling them, so that they could see their craving at work and how it's affecting their mind, and give them a chance to, maybe let go of some of the craving, come back to the stillness, and realize, you don't have to follow every desire. You don't have to identify with every thought, every desire in your mind. You can also just watch it arise and pass away. And maybe there's some peace in that stillness. So I would encourage you all today, from this talk, I would encourage you all to keep practicing, even if you have doubts, even if you have resistance. You can't be as bad as old Mr. Ghost of a Rat. He was really violently against the Dhamma when he started, but he managed to pacify his mind and come round to be a student of the Buddha. So if he can do that, I'm sure you can. I think you've already got faith in the Buddha and you find some joy in the Dhamma, but you do have to keep practicing. You have to do more. So that will be my final word to you. You keep up your practice, putting effort into your meditation, keeping the precepts, listening to the Dhamma, practicing kindness in daily life, being patient with the difficulties. And I hope that will bring you more and more peace and understanding that will be of your benefit and the benefit of family and friends.
And